must see all kinds of like marital and relationship issues, I can imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'd say no 2 days are the same. And I've been doing it for 10 years.
I see it in these, groups all the time. Oh, my husband, all he does is go out and sports afternoons and skiing trips away and all these things. So I know that that's a stressor. We know that the deployments are a stressor, and the separation. Are there any hidden stressors in military families?
I would say a big one that I've encountered working with military families, and it does boggle my mind hugely that when I've worked with so many military families, they haven't heard of. Essentially, if you have got used to running a household or whatever your circumstance, whether you have children, whether you don't, whether you're working, or just got used to essentially being on your own, and then someone comes back into your space, that is a whole lot of emotions and practical stuff as well to navigate, I think, because 99% of arguments, conflict, disagreement, upset, hurt, I would say, is caused by. And it's really tricky, isn't it? Because essentially, as you sort of depicted there, you have become entrenched in your positions and neither one is preparing to give ground.
Are there additional complexities or anything different around same-sex couples or different kinds of relationships that you get in this diverse world that we live in?
I mean, it's again a really interesting and good question, and I'd say, so my name is Emily Caddy. So I guess I'll start with my link to the military. So I am a Royal Navy spouse. I have been with my husband for 12 years, married 9 years in a couple of weeks.
It's a thing.
Absolutely.
And I'm so interested in what you do. I am really, really interested. Now, I know you won't see it like this because you're a therapist, but you must see all kinds of like marital and relationship issues, I can imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'd say no 2 days are the same. And I've been doing it for 10 years. So the variety is just, yeah, it's an incredible job, an incredible privilege to be trusted by clients. That's the terminology we use. Sometimes people might think that we refer to them as patients, but we always use the term client. So to be able to sit along clients when they're going through often some of their darkest, most challenging times, that is such a privilege. And yes, although there are often common presenting themes, every case is different, every person is individual, every partnership is very personal to that particular dynamic. So forever keeping me on my toes, it's a real joy.
Amazing. So do you just want to introduce yourself and your links to the military and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, my pleasure. So my name is Emily Caddy. So I guess I'll start with my link to the military. So I am a Royal Navy spouse. I have been with my husband for 12 years, married 9 years. In a couple of weeks' time is our 9-year wedding anniversary. So I got married when I was, I don't know, I'd say by today's standards is probably quite young. I got married when I was 24. So I'd say for a lot of my formative early adult years, adjusting to married life, but adjusting to married life in the military was a real experience. During that time, he has done multiple different roles. We've had periods of weekending, we've had periods of long deployments, and currently he is posted abroad, the other side of the world actually, on a ship, but for 2 years. So he comes back for 3 times a year for 4 weeks, each of those 3 times. So that is 8, 12. That's 12 weeks out of a year that he's home for in 3 separate stints. So that's what we're doing currently. Lucky enough, from my perspective, to be born and bred in the area where we live. So I have a very established support network, which I know so many spouses, military families don't have the benefit of having their family, friend support network right on the doorstep. As a parent, as a unit with a child, is something that is a new navigational area. Absolutely. So I can completely begin to see, because we're only at the beginning of our journey of parenthood, really, the extra complexities that can bring having a child, let alone before you then get into the schooling and all that sort of situation, and when they have an awareness that a parent is missing as well.
So your role then, so let's get into that, as a counsellor.
Yes, correct. So
Right.
I am a relationship counsellor. So that's the area I chose to specialise in. I've been a relationship counsellor for the past 10 years. And essentially what that means is I help people with relationship issues, whether that be them coming in attendance with their partner or husband, wife, spouse, whoever. So working with two people together as a couple, or whether that be working with people on an individual basis. And they might come to me individually for numerous reasons. It might be that they don't actually have a partner, but there are still relationship issues that they need to work through, maybe processing a past difficult breakup or a difficult relationship, or navigating dating, trying to find somebody. So relationship counselling is also for people to attend on their own, or sometimes people might come without their spouse because either their spouse doesn't know or doesn't want to attend, or they come together. And I trained in-house with Relate. So Relate, probably a lot of people have heard of them, but they are the national relationship counselling organisation. So I trained in-house with them. I trained in Plymouth. I did my actual training, then I did my placement in Portsmouth, and then I stayed with them for 8 years. And through them, because Relate have a contract with the RMRMC, RMRNC, I worked with a lot of Royal Navy and Royal Marine partnerships during my time there, which was fantastic to be able to help people who are very closely aligned to often, situations I found myself in, but they never knew that I had that military link myself, because we don't divulge anything really about ourselves. But I like to think that my inside knowledge was able to help them in a way, even if they didn't realise that.
So what really does counselling entail? It's my understanding that you don't offer strategies and interventions. Is that right? It's more encouraging people to figure out for themselves what they need.
It's a really interesting question, actually, because under the umbrella term of counsellor or therapist, I think counsellor and therapist are used pretty interchangeably in the UK. So generally, they would have been trained and qualified to the same level. Underneath that umbrella, people are going to be trained, practitioners are going to be trained in different modalities. So they'll come at it from slightly different perspectives, they'll focus on different areas. So, for example, some people might come at it very much from the root of being there as a purely listening and empathetic person, just to support the client to navigate their way through and find their own path. Someone might come from that particular sort of point of view. Another practitioner might be more directive, and offer strategies and tools. I would say I sit somewhere in the middle. The one thing we would never ever do is tell someone you have to do this or you have to do that. Ultimately, it is the choice very much of the client or clients to decide how they proceed with things. But certainly with relationship work, and I would say especially with couples, people are coming to you because they're wanting something to fundamentally change. And you offer sort of toolkit or some tips or homework, as I like to call it. I always put it in inverted commas because, again, there's no punishment, there's no expectation that it's necessarily going to be done, but to actually have something to work on, especially together, can be a really, really useful part of the process, because it brings two people together in unity who might not actually be singing off the same hymn. So to summarize, no one is ever going to tell you must do X, Y, and Z. And if you don't do that, there's going to be a particularly negative outcome or anything like that. We're not telling people. It has to come from a place of their own decision, to do whatever change or alteration that needs to be made. But we will make constructive suggestions, and I often use tools, diagrams, any sort of method or theory explained in a way that can be related to their own specific circumstance that will then be helpful, and just make it more user friendly, particularly if there are techniques that can be then used back in the home environment. Because ultimately, for example, if a couple are coming to see you, that's going to be for 1 hour out of a week. If there's 10 weekly, it might be less if they only come fortnightly or whatever. So they need to then be okay, or at least be able to continue to make progress in that home environment. So giving them some techniques to do that is really, really helpful.
Amazing. So thinking of military families specifically, I mean, we all know, we're all aware of the general challenges that military families face, you know, the separation, and there's a kind of I don't want to say jealousy, but there is a little bit. I know I have experienced it in the past where my husband's he phoned me once at 8 o'clock in the morning from a casino,
Mm.
or he'd
Oh,
just got in from the casino. Don't get me wrong, I don't have an issue, because actually I know that the operation they were on was really, really challenging, and they'd
yeah,
been working really hard for a long, long time. And so a night out wherever they were to blow off some steam was well needed. But at the time I was cleaning the oven, you
yeah.
know, I got oven pride on my arm. I could feel
Oh,
it blistering as he was telling me
oh,
about his amazing night out last night. And I just was like, not
oh,
now. And
absolutely.
I know that I'm not on my own in that. I see it in these, you
Yeah.
know, groups all the time. Oh, my husband, you know, all he does is go out and sports afternoons and skiing
Mm,
trips away and all these things. So I know that that's a stressor. We know that the deployments are a stressor,
mm.
and the separation. Are there any hidden stressors in military families, things that maybe aren't so obvious, but they're definitely a thing? Is there like a theme?
I would say a big one that I've encountered working with military families, and it does boggle my mind hugely that when I've worked with so many military families, they haven't heard of the deployment cycle, or no one has come or shown them the deployment cycle. And I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with, but maybe don't speak about because they're worried that that's not how it should be, or that maybe it indicates that there is some problem, maybe in the relationship dynamic, is that homecoming process, or even that process, even if it's not a homecoming process from deployment, even if it's just reintegrating when they come back after a weekend, so no, sorry, for a weekend, that isn't all sunshine and flowers. Because I think so many people either hope it's going to be, or think there is some pressure that it is going to be, whereas actually reuniting can be one of the most challenging times out of all of it. And although there are hopefully going to be those emotions there of excitement, looking forward to welcoming that person back, essentially, if you have got used to running a household, or whatever your circumstance, whether you have children, whether you don't, whether you're working, or just got used to essentially being on your own, and then someone comes back into your space, that is a whole lot of emotions and practical stuff as well to navigate. So even if there is that joyful initial reunion, quite quickly people tend to find they can get under each other's feet. They can really irritate each other. For the person returning home, it might be that there has been some changes made around the place that work better for the person who's left behind to manage everything on their own. They might not have felt they were consulted with those, for example. And similarly, you know, the person who's been there all along, you having to get used to reintroducing this person back into your space and into your setting. And of course, particularly if you've been apart for a long time, you are probably going to have changed in some way. Both of you, there is going to be some growth there. You're both going to have experienced different things, just like as you cited there. Your lived experiences are probably highly likely to have been different. Yes, obviously working very hard when they're away, but they are typically going to have probably had some exciting runs ashore to various degrees, and that's probably not what the person at home is experiencing. So I would say that is something that crops up quite a lot, that the reintegration into home life doesn't go quite as smoothly as people hope it we'll go. And actually, I think when you're dealing with a weekending situation, that can be amplified, because if you're constantly having someone coming and going, and I think you said you're in a weekending pattern, is that
Yes.
correct? So that's a personal question, but if you don't mind me asking, how do you find that generally, sort of the coming back after a week absence?
Actually, I love it, to be
You
honest.
love
We're
it.
we're good with
That's
it.
great.
Yeah. I don't know. I we just settle. We always do things like teamwork
I love
anyway,
that.
and so we kind of my husband's amazing. Like, I don't want to
Oh.
give him too much of a big head, but he definitely comes home and he'll pick up like the slack, and he'll be like, "Oh, you stay in bed, tomorrow morning, like on a Friday night, he'll be like, you stay in bed, I'll get up with Theo and, take him to his clubs or whatever, and I'll come down and there'll be, a load of washing done, the breakfast all done, and all that
Amazing.
stuff." Like he's super good like that. We don't have any issues like that. I tell you who struggles more with it is my son, because
Mm,
I am the cool, fun parent. So when
excellent.
hubby's away, we call it getting up to mischief. Like
Oh.
we're like, oh, daddy's not here. It's how I kind of make things a bit easier for my son because he misses his dad like mad. But I'm just like, come on, while
Mm,
daddy's gone, what mischief are we getting up to? And it might just be staying up a bit later to watch a movie, or or I might, buy him something like a treat where his dad would say, nope, not till your birthday or whatever. So I'm the softer, more fun parent, and then daddy comes home and it's all really strict again. So um, with Theo, he'll be a bit like, oh, well, mummy lets me do that, and so we have an adjustment period there. But apart from that, yeah, at the moment we're good with it.
oh, that's so good to hear. That's great. But it sounds like you've worked out your various roles in that situation. And what I really like the sound of there is the fact that when he does return, your his presence is felt in a way that you're both benefiting from it, i.e., you and your son, when I say both. So you're getting a bit of a breather. Your son is getting that quality time with him, and it sounds like you're managing that really well. And that links into like division of labour stuff as well, which is a very um, common thing that all
Yeah,
partnerships struggle with, but I think can particularly be felt in partnerships where there is an absent person.
that's it. So I don't want to, rub it in and be all smug to people that are struggling,
Oh,
because no marriage is perfect. There have been
no.
issues along the road, but we work
Mm,
through them just like everybody. But for now, I'd say, yep, things are good and we manage it.
no, absolutely not. And it will go in peaks and troughs, and there'll be good times and there'll be not so good times. But a real key component of all dynamics, of all relationships, military or otherwise, is having effective and open communication channels, I think, because 99% of arguments, conflict, disagreement, upset, hurt, I would say, is caused by miscommunication. So that is a super important thing, again, so often that we are deprived of, I think, in the military setting, where our communication is limited, or maybe when we're holding out for that precious phone call and then something gets in the way of that, screaming child, or it gets cut off. So yeah, the communication side of things is really important.
Absolutely. And so I guess I would put the question back to you, because you're
Please.
doing this really challenging 4 week home, months away, four
Mm,
weeks at home. Like that has got to be really tough, because you have in that longer period to settle into your own routine with your
yeah.
family. And then it all gets turned around. How do you manage it?
I guess it comes back to the communication side of things and discussing. I mean, this all sounds very formalized, but I think sometimes it needs to be quite a formal process of discussing your needs, wants, hopes, and expectations, not just related to this scenario, but I think it's a really good example of what do you want out of that particular period of leave. And we are good at talking about that in advance of it happening. So in those 4 weeks, let's say, we'll want to spend time as a family unit. We'll want some couple time. There'll be some room for individual downtime as well, because after all, it is his holiday and his breather.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that needs to be built in. And then also me having a bit of a breather or a different experience, at least, of having him here. Of course, then catching up with various people where it's possible. But I would say just really thinking about needs, wants, making sure you both voice something that feels important for you, working out logistically how that can happen, and trying to make sure that, okay, we might not get everything that we need and want achieved in that short space of time, because there'll be things like household jobs as well that need doing, or domestic tasks. So it's just making sure there is as much balance there as possible, and the dialogue has been open about that.
And what if someone can't agree? So say if, I'm a spouse, my husband's on a ship,
Yeah.
and say we're in that situation, he's coming home, he's got this 4 week period before going off again, and we're emailing,
Yeah.
which we have done on a ship before, and he's saying, well, these things are a priority for me. I want to
Mm.
go on a golf weekend with my friends. I want to catch up with my family who live here. I want to go to
Mhm.
Wales and catch up with my friends there. And I would like to do something with you and Theo. And, that's it. And then I would be like, well, actually, the garden's been really neglected. So I could do with you doing that. And I really need a break. I was hoping to have a spa weekend with my friends
Yeah.
while you're back. And maybe you could take that as an opportunity to have some quality time with Theo. And then what if there just isn't enough time for us to both do or both have what we feel we need, but no one's prepared to relent, right? And it becomes
Mm.
you become at loggerheads. What happens then? Because I see this a lot in the groups
Mm.
where people, they just, no one wants to back down.
No. And it's really tricky, isn't it? Because essentially, as you sort of depicted there, you have become entrenched in your positions, and neither one is preparing to give ground. I mean, firstly, trying to have an understanding about what that is feeling like for each party, because I think so often we attach our feelings and emotions, particularly if it's anger, hurt, or upset, to something that is tangible. I'll try and explain that a bit easier. So, say for example, uh, a disagreement is breaking out between two people because one is wanting to go off and do one thing and the other is wanting to go off and do the other. I would suggest initially trying to take a moment, maybe on your own, first of all, to process your emotions behind that. So, what does it mean? What does it feel for you that the other person is wanting to do that? What is the message that you are reading and hearing? Because coming back to the whole communication piece I was saying a moment ago, so often we hear a message that might not necessarily be there, spoken or not, from the other person. So, he's saying, let's say it's a he's saying he wants to go off for a golf weekend. She's then maybe feeling, let's just take it as an heterosexual couple. She's then thinking he doesn't maybe love me as much as I love him. He doesn't want to prioritize spending time with me, etc., etc. So trying to work out the emotion that it brings up for you, and then trying to tackle it from a slightly different perspective rather than just maintaining those loggerheads positions. So I would always suggest something like the checking in exercise, which is a good example of something we would practice maybe in the therapy room, and then with the hope of that being integrated into everyday life, or at least regular life, where if I would say this is a general rule. So say if your spouse says or does something, which can definitely be applied to this context, that then leaves you feeling uneasy, leaves you feeling a negative emotion of whatever kind, if that is still sitting there for you 5 minutes later, don't give it any more than 5 minutes. Go to them and say, is it okay if I just check that out with you, or can I just check in with you? And then say, when you said this, this, and this, or when you expressed this and this, I heard or I felt, and it's really important to use those I statements, because what that does is takes away any blame and hopefully prevents escalation. I heard or I felt you would rather see your friends rather than spend time with me. or that was a higher priority for you than, I don't know, going away for some couple time. And then that gives them a chance to come back and explain from their perspective why whatever action it is that they're stating is important to them, why that is important to them, and the meaning that they themselves attach to it. Is this making sense? Does that sort of answer
Yes,
your question?
absolutely. And it all sounds very reasonable and very obvious. But when you're in the moment, all that
100%.
sense of reason goes out the window. It's a bit like parenting, isn't it? Where, often a lot of parenting solutions are quite simple, but when you're in it and they're pushing your buttons, you can't see it. But you just
100%.
need someone, don't you, on the outside to say, hey, try it like this. But so how would people remember, like, what can people do when they're feeling so emotional? Because relationships are so emotional, and
Mm,
especially in the military relationship, when there's all the distance and the feelings and the stress, everything around it, it can just be like, it can heighten everything, can't it? And so
absolutely.
how can people remember, what can people do to bring them back into the moment, to be able to reason, to do these things and step
Mm.
out of it, to say, okay, I need to come at this from this angle.
Yeah, really, really good question. And firstly, before I just go on and answer that, just linking back to the checking in exercise or anything else,
Sorry.
no, 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 not no, don't apologise at all. It's just because it links to this point. I would never, and this is the thing, when you are using a tool that effectively you have picked up in counselling, it makes it so much easier if both people have been in attendance, they've both heard that tool as a suggestion from a neutral third party whose only position is to help both of them equally. Where it can sometimes backfire is if, I don't know, maybe one person has got hold of this technique or whatever, and it's not an agreed thing between the two of them about how they're going to implement that. I would say that's really key. So if the other party had never heard of checking in, if their partner suddenly said that to them, they're probably thinking, what the hell are you talking about? And that'll probably just make it worse. So that's why it's really important to try and come at these things together. And that's where seeing a counsellor or a therapist can be really useful, especially before things have reached crisis point. I mean, I'm such a strong advocate of that. I'd say a lot of people I see when a lot of hurt, damage has already been done. Whereas actually, if we could try and bring that forward, so prevention is better than cure, just to check in at an earlier state, particularly in military partnerships. A relationship MOT, that's one of my favourite things. We do it for our cars, we go to the dentist probably regularly, we get our hair cut, all these other things we attend to on a regular basis. Why would we not attend to our relationship, which is arguably one of the most important things in most people's lives? Why would we not attend to that in the same way? Having a sort of a health view of it, a view of its health before any particular critical issues have cropped up. Coming back to what you're saying, I do have this tendency to waffle because I love it so much. What you were saying about how do you sort of get yourself in the moment to be able to come together and communicate effectively? If that is that what you were sort of saying?
Yes, when you're feeling all these big feelings and
Yeah,
emotions, it can just be hard to have that sense of reasoning or to remember. You forget,
100%.
don't you? You forget. It all goes
100%.
out the window.
100%. So again, what I would suggest here, and obviously much more useful if this has been suggested by a neutral third party, I'd use a technique called hitting the pause button. So essentially, if a conversation is just at loggerheads or if it is becoming circular and no forward progress is being made and you're just going round and round and round, and probably it's escalating by this point as well, agreeing to hit the pause button, which is essentially saying, okay, from my perspective at least, I'm feeling that this is becoming circular in nature or it's not being helpful. I just need to have some time out. Now, what we do need to appreciate and understand is different people come to that point at different times in a conversation. So one person might reach the point where they're needing that space quicker than the other person. So in order to then make it an effectual and beneficial and equal thing, for both parties, it would be to say, okay, I need this time out, but let's contract and agree what that is going to look like. So, how long that is going to be, we don't just want someone disappearing off and then the poor person over here left thinking, oh, I haven't managed to express myself, and now they've left the situation. So agree, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go to another part of the house, and I'm going to put a timer on that. So whether it be 50 minutes, half an hour, whatever, make sure that is contracted so both parties know where they stand, and then that you are indeed going to come back and talk about it and resume. And then hopefully that space will allow you both to be productive and use it to get a bit of a different perspective and more clarity, rather than, because what can happen if one person feels that the other is sort of dictating that or using that as a method of controlling the situation, let's say, they then will get increasingly wound up and flustered and irritated, angry, hurt, whatever, whilst the other person might well indeed be cooling down. But by the time they're returned, then the person over here is probably going to be feeling much less happy than they were before the whole thing even started. So making sure it's an agreed technique and tactic. So explaining what you're doing, first of all, don't just stomp off if you can possibly help it. Agree where you are going in that time, certainly how long you're going to be away for, and then come back at an agreed time to talk about it again. And in that time apart, thinking about what are the important points, what do you really want to say, and what do you need to set that conversation up for success as well. If you're having these conversations, and that's a general, I'd say to everybody, whatever you're discussing, try to set your conversation up for success. So not when one of you's rushing out the door, when you have a calm space, if you have children, maybe when they're in bed, so you can be solely focused on each other, and give it the time and space it deserves. So I think so often things do escalate because one or both parties don't feel they're being properly listened to, heard, in that moment, which is often because we're distracted by multiple other things that are going on at the same time.
Yes, okay. And again, in terms of what people want to get out of a conversation, coming back to the counselling, is it a common thing for when people come to see you that they would set relationship goals, or is that not a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, relationship goals would quite often crop up. And often, I mean, people generally come for a reason. So, in that sense, there will often be a goal. And what I would say is with couple work as well, there has to be what we call a shared agenda. Otherwise, the therapy isn't effective. So there has to be a shared target they are both working towards, even if they have a different view of what that ideal target would look like, or if they're coming at it from different perspectives. So, for example, I know a very typical presentation we see in relationship counselling is affairs, cheating, infidelity, whatever terminology you want to apply to it. So, essentially, where a breach of trust has occurred because there has been an encroaching of a third party into that dynamic. So, they'll be coming at it probably from a different perspective often, but trying to agree a shared, common, hoped for outcome is really, really important. So yes, having some goals is really helpful.
I don't know if you can answer this, but
Go on.
I'm going to ask, is there like a reason why people cheat, particularly with military families? Can you narrow it down to a specific, this is the number one reason why people cheat, this is number two, this is number three, or is it just, do you just get people who are cheaters and they'll always be cheaters?
Yeah, it's very tricky to say, and I guess sort of starting, maybe not answering your question straight away, but a question I always ask when there has been an infringement into a relationship by a third party is what was or wasn't going on between the two of you to allow room for a third party to come into the equation. That would be where I'd start. Secondarily, I think, and this is super, super, super important, and I'd say specifically as well in the military community where you are going to be apart often for long periods of time, and I think where trust is arguably even more important than in maybe relationships where you see each other regularly, is making sure you have a conversation which can feel awkward, which isn't necessarily the most comfortable thing to have early on in your dynamic, early on in your partnership, what to you constitutes as acceptable and unacceptable behaviour? Because again, coming back to the prevention and cure situation, the amount of times I've sat in front of a partnership and one person is saying, you know, I'm just using this example, that it's a he, you know, he's cheated on me, he's broken my heart, he's betrayed me, blah, blah, blah. And he's sitting there saying, okay, I get maybe it's not great, but I don't deem it as cheating. I don't deem it as being something that is 100% relationship ending. So really trying to understand and establish what is okay and what is not okay within the bounds of a relationship. In terms of what you were saying, can I categorize the reasons why people cheat? I think that's really hard, but I think saying that question, or asking yourselves that question, or a therapist asking that question, what was or wasn't going on between the two of you, to allow room for that third party to come in, that is a really good thing and a good starting point to consider. And there are theories and thoughts, you know, that people have affairs or whatever terminology you want to use for different reasons. So, for example, someone might just stumble upon that situation. They might be intoxicated. They haven't really gone out seeking it. It's just sort of happened to them, would be how they would explain it. And they have no interest or hope that that is going to disrupt their setup at home. So there is that scenario. There is a scenario where maybe someone is either proactively or actively looking for something else because they realise, or don't realise either consciously or unconsciously, but that something is missing, and actually whether or not they want to leave their current relationship, they know that they are not happy. So therefore there is a void, and where there is a void, then obviously there is a risk. And then I guess you can get the category, again, it can be unconscious or conscious, where people using it as a bit of an exit strategy, and whether they openly tell their partner that that's happened, or whether they don't really care whether they find out or not, but it's almost then a relief that that would then be deemed as something that would cause the relationship to end if perhaps they haven't felt able to express it in other terms earlier on. There could be that category as well, but it is such a broad area and everyone is an individual within it. Is any of that useful? I hope so.
Yeah, it is. It's super useful. I'm intrigued with this, but not because of me and my husband, but from other things that we've witnessed over the years. But one question I want to ask before I get into that quickly is, there's an old saying, once a cheater, always a cheater. Is that the case, or is it not really the case? I guess if someone's cheated and they've suffered the consequences and they wish they hadn't, then I guess they wouldn't always be a cheater, would they? Or is it once they've crossed that line and, you know, at some point they're at risk of doing that again?
I think it's a really individual case by case, and I have certainly worked with many people where there has been an incident of cheating, and then certainly in terms of, for as long as I've been working with them, and the picture I've had when they've then gone on and left me and gone off by themselves, is that that has very much been repaired, and that will certainly not occur again. I think it's about understanding the motivation and the circumstances surrounding the crossing of boundaries to have happened. And that's really where it can be useful to talk one-on-one with the person who is seen as the instigator in that situation, so the one who has maybe been the cheater, let's say. So as part of couple work, I mean, certainly ordinarily I would talk to them. I'd have an individual session with them each very early on anyway, sessions 2 and 3, and then quite often if an issue crops up where maybe there is not the ability to talk freely as a 3 initially, I would suggest having some individual time with each of them. It's really important to keep that balance. So I always say, if I see one party of the partnership individually, then I will also see the other person individually as well, so it feels equal and balanced, and there isn't an alliance growing between one party over the other, because our role is strictly to be in the middle, equal, and helping both of them. But no, I don't think that rule applies, once a cheater, always a cheater. It's about understanding the motivation. I mean, in some cases it probably will, but that will depend on the psychology and what's going on and what is the determining factor. Or in some situations, which I think people can find really painful, they might be once a cheater, always a cheater with a specific partner, but they maybe go on and be faithful with somebody else, which can be really, really, really difficult and painful. But if examined, there'll be something about that dynamic. No fault of anybody at all necessarily, but just something that isn't quite there to mean that that boundary is being respected for whatever reason.
Yeah. Gosh, that would be difficult.
Mm.
Do you have much or have you had much experience with swingers or people with like multi relationships? What is it? Poly something?
Polyamory.
Yeah. Do you have much experience of that? Because I can imagine
Yeah.
that can get really complex. And we have friends that are swingers, and not we are conventional and monogamous and all these things, but
Mm.
you know, we have, you know, we do know people that like to be adventurous, let's
Yeah.
say, and that can come with a lot of problems, I think. So is that something that
Mm.
comes up?
I mean, it certainly does, and I think generally, as I was sort of alluding to earlier, people only come to see me really when there is a problem. So any person who is pursuing or any partnership who's pursuing polyamory, open relationship, whatever the terminology, again, they're probably only in front of me because something isn't quite working for one or both of them. In general, I think if you're looking at it from an outside perspective, you would probably think if that's not a mentality or a relationship dynamic that you and your partner are familiar with, you would probably see that as posing maybe more complexities and more complications than if you are just out and out, yeah, we are monogamous and it's so we're only there for each other. But in terms of, I guess, the added stuff that goes with that when you're having other parties involved in your dynamic in whatever form, of course there can run the risk of that there are more potential boundaries to be crossed, and certainly there are more boundaries that maybe need to be examined. Like, for example, some people I've worked with, that it's not the sex side of things or the physical contact with other people that is problematic, but it's if there is a forming of any sort of emotional connection that is the problematic thing.
Right.
Whereas for somebody else, maybe their partner getting emotional comfort from somebody, and this is very, it's all very, specific to those individuals. Maybe that's not too problematic, but the idea of them having sex with somebody is particularly challenging. I mean, without probing because of your friends, but do you know how their situation operates for them?
So there's one, particularly that comes to mind, and we're going back quite a number of years now. And that they were, raging swingers, I would say. They used to go to all kinds of parties and
Yeah.
would have all kinds of tales to tell that just used to, I don't know, blow my mind and make me just want to go home and have a hot chocolate.
Love that.
But they went through, one particular couple, a really nasty breakup, and it is
Mm,
all because the female,
mm,
it was a male female partnership. She was having sex with another man behind his back, which
mm.
she had had sex with this man before as part of their swinging
Yeah,
arrangement and lifestyle,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it was the secretive
Yes.
element that destroyed the relationship, um,
Yeah, absolutely.
which is a real shame, I suppose. But it was
It is a real shame.
it's the sneakiness and the lying, I guess, I
Mm.
suppose, that did that.
And because it's changed it from what it was agreed to be. So without knowing the ins and outs of their arrangement, but it sounds like, as you say, they were both into the swinging. That was something they both participated in. And for their particular dynamic, what was appealing about that for both of them is that they both had an awareness of who they were swinging with and who was involved in that situation. as soon as there is a lack of transparency there, then that is no longer staying in line with what they viewed as their swinging open relationship, whatever terminology they want to
Yeah.
apply. It changes it.
Is it a valid strategy? Like when you watch certain programs, like I don't know, Sex and the City or something like that. I'm trying to think of a particular program that comes to mind. I know I've seen it where a relationship have gone to counselling, a couple, and the counsellors recommended spicing things up a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
is that something that you would suggest ever as a strategy for a couple?
Again, I guess it would be what they were both asking and hoping for. So often couples do come and say, you know, whether it be one or both of them, oh, they wish that the relationship had more X, Y, and Z about it, or they wish they were physically closer, or whatever it is. And if then that is a shared agenda by both of them and there is a desire to do that, then absolutely we would help support them to spice it up or whatever they were hoping to achieve. If there is some issue relating specifically to sex and there is something sexual going on that may or may not be working, whether it be a psychological issue, whether there might be a psychological issue then causing a physical issue, then that's when typically we would refer to someone called a psychosexual therapist, who are then able to work in that more in-depth way and help people generally through exercises that they do then at home. They will talk them through in the sessions, and that's something you can then practice at home to help with whatever the issue is. But as the word would suggest, so it's psychosexual therapy. So it is issues that arise from a psychological problem, but so often the psychological problem then has a physical manifestation. So, for example, an inability to get an erection for a man, for example, might be rooted in some sort of psychological anxiety. Yeah.
Psychosexual therapy. I never knew it as a thing, so
Did you
hopefully.
not?
No.
This is the thing I forget, because when you live in your own like specialist bubble, and Relate also offers psychosexual therapy too, so you can access free sessions.
Well, that might be really helpful for someone listening to know that, because I'm not
Absolutely,
sure, maybe it's just me
absolutely.
that's never heard of it, but maybe there are other people that
Yeah.
aren't feeling quite fulfilled that might benefit from that. So
100%. And the thing is, a lot of so with psychosexual therapy, before you would get straight to that point, you would have a relationship overview just to make sure that the situation was not relational in nature, i.e., any sexual difficulties was not being caused by relationship issues. So, for example, I don't know, if you're feeling cross or angry with your partner or upset with your partner, generally speaking, for the vast majority of us, the last thing we want to do is then go and have sex with them or be close with them, even sit maybe next to them on the sofa if we're feeling really unhappy. So first and foremost, we would work to understand what is going on from a relational perspective to make sure that there aren't any blocks or barriers emotionally that are going on to prevent that, in which case then that needs to be discussed. But if that's proven not to be the case and both people are wanting to improve their sexual relationship, then it would be looking at psychosexual therapy. Similarly, like if there, I don't know, a woman is experiencing pain on penetration, for example, it might be that there's a medical reason for that, in which case that would be the psychosexual therapist encouraging them to go to the doctor and see if there is a medical cause to that, or that pain might be rooted in something psychological which they could then help with. So yeah, it's a whole other area. But the headline is that there is no issue that therapists, providing you find the right one, and that's where I would hope. I mean, I always love signposting people if it's not an area that I can work in, if signposting them to a specialist, then yeah, there's no area that they can't be supported in. So hopefully that is helpful to somebody.
so with everything that's been discussed, it's all about partners working together with shared agendas, shared goals, shared commitment. if you
Yeah.
like. Does it work for single people?
What, relationship counselling?
Yeah,
A
not
hundred.
single people. I don't mean people who are single, but people who come to you on their own because their partner doesn't want to. That's what I mean.
Absolutely, 100%. In fact, I'm working with a lot of single or single attendees, let's call them single attendees to the counselling process at the moment. And as I said before, they all have different circumstances. Some are single in terms of relationship status, some are just attending by themselves because either their issue does not specifically relate to their partner, it might be about a previous partner or something else that is relationship or it might be because their partner doesn't want to attend, or it might be that their partner doesn't know that they're attending. I think there are always certain circumstances where, and I can think of numerous times where this has happened, where maybe someone has attended individually with me for a period of X amount of sessions, and then I say, actually, it would be really helpful if we could get your partner in the room. This is in the situation if they do have a partner, because we've worked through whatever sort of the individual stuff is, and now we need to get them in. I think it can also be a really useful process if someone is working out how they're feeling, or if they want to say something to their partner but haven't quite found the right words. So rather than just launching into couple sessions without having that clarity, I guess, in their own mind about what they want to say, or how they want, or how they want to communicate that fact, that can be really useful. And not necessarily all relationship issues, I would say, relate to the current partner. So coming back to, if say there's been, let's say, maybe trauma from a past relationship. So I've also worked at my local rape, sexual abuse and domestic violence counselling crisis service, and that is one of my subspecialisms. So I work with well, when I was at Relate, I would commonly come across people presenting as a couple where one would be a perpetrator and one would be a victim, and or victim or survivor, whatever terminology people want to use. And that would very much be case by case, seeing whether that would be appropriate to continue into couple work. More often than not, it wouldn't be deemed appropriate because things were too volatile, and it would be about doing some very short-term individual work with both of them to signpost them to appropriate support. So just like I was saying earlier with the psychosexual therapy, it's really important to have a portfolio of appropriate services and resources you would signpost people to. So signposting maybe someone with help for their anger, or signposting someone to get help to rebuild after they have been on the receiving end of abusive behaviours, for example. So it can be that, so say if a client, so now in private practice, I do specifically work with people who have experienced historic abuse, whatever form that takes. So say if someone is in a current partnership but actually wants to process something that happened in a previous partnership, individual sessions with them can be really, really useful, because it might not be something that they feel they want to do in front of their partner. That might not be a process that actually feels connected to that, or they want to do that work before then moving forward and talking things through. But also people without partners, relationship counselling can be really helpful. So if they're looking to get back into dating, for example, that can be really fun. Good fun pieces of work, looking at people wanting to maybe re-establish what it feels like to get themselves out into that space of meeting new people, or learning to be happy by themselves. There's also really good work to be done there. The relationship with yourself too. Relationship counselling doesn't necessarily just have to be about an intimate other, or wanting an intimate other. It can be about making peace with being on your own, or working through the relationship with yourself to improve that.
Okay, so let's just take a military couple that have come to you for help. So we'll just go with the standard model of a standard military couple.
Okay.
But they've decided they've come to the end of their relationship, through this counselling. It's kind of been agreed. What happens then?
Okay. So quite typically, actually, we do a lot of work with couples who end up separating, and it might be some come to us already with that in mind, and it's just about helping to support and hold them and guide them. But I'd say probably more often than not, that process is worked out as part of the therapy. And I guess in an ideal world, sort of the picture and scenario that you're painting there is that they've both come to that agreement. I suppose it's about looking at both of them and talking to both of them and establishing what they need moving forward from that point. If it was to get to that conclusion that actually the relationship is over, um, working out, okay, well, is there anything else that needs to be discussed from a relationship therapeutic point of view? So maybe things like um, emotions around co-parenting, or the practicals around that if there are children involved, or um, how they are going to move forward in an amicable way if there is indeed a need for them to move forward in an amicable way. That would be where relationship counselling would still be useful. Similarly, if one or both of them needed further individual support to process that breakup and move forward and begin to heal from that, that is where you would signpost them individually to probably a relationship counsellor, but to have separate individual sessions with a relationship counsellor. If it's moving into the territory when they're trying to work out more the financials, the legals, then you would suggest mediation if they felt they needed that route. Which is again another situation of signposting, because those practitioners can help with the practical side of things a lot more. But it might well be that after they've had some of those closing sessions and they've agreed that they're parting ways, one or both of them might indeed want a bit more further support. So you would suggest some individual counselling for that.
And then how do you support someone to either then move on to learn to be happy on their own, or to get to a place where they're ready to put themselves out there again?
It's a long journey, or a long or short journey. It depends. Again, it depends very much where the starting point is, and I guess what they feel they need to process to get to that point. So it might be a very different scenario. Say if a relationship has ended and it has felt like it is amicable and it has been an agreed thing between both parties, and neither necessarily feel either has done something dreadfully wrong to the other, then that might be more of a seamless process, because it will be probably just about supporting that initial upset, that change, that shift, um, and helping with that. If there has been some identifiable injury, that is probably going to take a bit more time, because that is going to need to be understood and processed from a perspective that doesn't leave them feeling that in any way they are broken or damaged or unable to move on into something else in the future, or in the interim just be happy with themselves. Does that answer that question?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
It does,
Yeah.
thank you. And I I was wondering as well, because obviously we've talked about your kind of very general male female, couple. Do
Mm.
Are there additional complexities or anything different around same-sex couples or different kinds of relationships that
Mm.
you get now in this diverse world that we live in?
I mean, it's again a really interesting and good question, and I'd say it is a shame because statistically, certainly when I was at Relate, our primary sort of primary, is that the right word? The predominant couple that would come to us would be a heterosexual couple. Um, but of course, all other types of couples, whether that be same-sex couples or open relationships, whatever, they all exist out there too, and some of them are going to be having issues as well. So in terms of how many of them present to counselling, I don't know if the same proportion of, let's say, same-sex couples who are having problems would present to therapy versus heterosexual couples, which is a whole other thing to discuss, and I don't really know why that would be the case. In terms of the homosexual couples that I have had the privilege of working with, I'd say the issues that they have certainly come with have been very, very similar in terms of theme, presentation, complexity to heterosexual couples. There hasn't been a particular difference at all. It's just been that it's either been two men or two women versus a man and a woman. But no like noticeable difference in theme.
Yeah,
No.
I wasn't expecting there to be. I couldn't think of anything myself. I just wanted to ask the
No,
question
it
just
is
to
a
make sure
really, it's
we've
a
covered
really
everything.
interesting. No, it's a really, really interesting question. But and maybe other therapists would report differently. But certainly from my perspective, that hasn't been the case at all in terms of
Yeah.
it being a different presentation.
And then back to what you were talking about another part of your role that
Mm,
is around kind of the less nice element of relationships.
mm.
I don't know if you looked at other podcast episodes, but episode 1 is around domestic abuse in the military community. And I'm assuming that you probably had a fair number of cases through your door where there has been some kind of abuse present in one form or another. And I know you're going to say it depends on the type of abuse and the severity of it, but can couples come back from that where there's abuse present in a relationship? Can that be healed?
I mean, that is such a big question, and I know I'm going to be unhelpful here, but like you just said, it is a very case by case situation, and the thing that trumps everything from a therapeutic point of view is safety. So we only continue therapeutic work or start therapeutic work if we think it is safe and it is not going to escalate things. So essentially, in order to go into the therapeutic process, people have to be, to a degree, able to manage their emotions and need to be able to, albeit have difficult conversations, things that might get very heated or very emotional. That's fine. That's on the spectrum of what feels safe, but they need to be able to have that ability to be able to relate to each other in a way where no one is going to be harmed in any abusive context, especially, as I said earlier, it was relating to a different point, but obviously they're only in front of you, let's say, an hour a week. We have to be very mindful of what goes on in the home environment afterwards. So if they come to you and then you end up talking about all this stuff, you have to make sure, from as far as you can possibly manage, and sort of boundary, that then it is going to be okay when they go home, or it's going to be okay. It's okay from a safety point of view, even if emotionally it feels very challenging. Can people recover from that? I think, again, it 100% depends on what is going on in that dynamic. So the severity of the abuse, what the abuse looks like, the pattern of the abuse, the history behind where that abusive behavior is coming from, acceptability, accountability. Have I seen partnerships where it has indeed been possible to move forward? Absolutely. But in order to work with a couple who are presenting with abusive behaviours, that criteria is probably, in all honesty, quite small, because we have to prioritise that safety. So, for example, if this would be a good example, actually. So a couple have come, and let's just say he's saying she is emotionally abusive to me. She's controlling, or says nasty things to me, and that feels emotionally abusive. If we then do a bit of work where he feels he is able to express that to her, and then she is receptive of that, and we can then collaboratively look at how to move forward to improve things, and there is that recognition and acceptance that that behavior is not okay and that that needs to change, then some really good work can be done. If there isn't that acceptance, then that is very hard, because A, we don't have that shared agenda like we were talking about, and B, then potentially we're moving into unsafe territory. And although it is really important to remember that all forms of abuse are really damaging and horrendous to be subjected to. So when I talk about all forms of abuse, I guess just so everyone's clear, the four that are coming into my head would be psychological, mental, and emotional abuse. That's one. They're just different terms to describe it. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, and financial abuse. We do have to pay more attention initially, I think, if, say, someone is receiving abuse where the effects are physical, because there is a risk there that things could ultimately spiral, particularly if you're then talking about difficult things. So it's about making sure we get everybody the support they need to try and lead to the best outcome for everybody. And quite often, after maybe getting some individual support for both of them, it might well be appropriate that they can come back together and have some further couple work. Or it might be that actually doing some individual work, one party might decide that they don't want to be in that relationship anymore, or one party might decide that they really need to work on themselves, or there might not be the necessary recognition made. But I would say, if there is going to be success in navigating a relationship where there has been some abusive element, first and foremost is making sure there is a plan regarding the safety. That's number one. But secondarily, that in order to start any sort of process, there has to be a recognition, acceptance that the behaviour is wrong, inappropriate, abusive, and what are the things that need to be put in place to prevent that moving forwards.
Yes, and possibly some confidence or self-esteem work, I
100%.
imagine, for the victim
Exactly.
partner in the dynamic.
Exactly. And that's certainly why in private practice, so as I say, it would probably be quite rare if there was live domestic violence, whatever form that takes, that you would continue with couple work straight away, at least until you had found a safe way to proceed. There would be limited circumstances where that would be appropriate. But when you're working with people who are overcoming the effects of historical DBA, that is it's a much safer place to work from, obviously, and you can then actually really be proactive in terms of moving things forward for the people who have experienced that.
Yeah, gosh, that's like that's a more, we've talked about, the fun elements of your role, and that you often find yourself laughing in the sessions along with, the is it clients, you said you call them?
Yeah, clients.
And then so you have that end of the scale and then this end of the scale as well. So when you said at the beginning that it's you've seen it all, and it's every case is so different. I mean,
yeah,
you wasn't lying, was you? It's definitely,
no,
I'm trying to get my words out, but varied, I think, in terms
absolutely.
of the spectrum that you must see, and the support that you give to people. So I've got, go on.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say just one thing very quickly. I just wanted to say about the abusive stuff as well. So often, from a therapist point of view, you have to have your antennae up as well, because not everyone, they might recognize that the behaviors of another person is making them feel unhappy or scared or worried, but they won't actually apply that abuse label to it.
Right.
So that's where then, as a therapist, having your antennas up to identify, because not every horrible behaviour that someone does to somebody, it necessarily falls under the category of abuse. And that's where looking at definitions that are, say, listed on Women's Aid, which is a great one, which I always signpost people to. I know that is an organisation set up to support women who are the survivors or victims of domestic abuse. But what it does do is it gives you a list of, if you're experiencing X, Y, or Z behaviours, then it is likely that you are experiencing abuse. Because I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. They think, is it abuse? Is it not abuse?
Have you had anyone who's surprised where you've gone, hey, you know what you're describing here is a really abusive relationship, and they've gone, what? No.
Yeah, a lot of times, and I'd say that's where you have to be really careful with the term and the semantics, but it is really important to say what it is, but being gentle with that, because that is not going to land sort of 9 times out of 10 very well. It is going to become quite, well, it changes the tone. It changes the tone, and it makes it feel really heavy, and particularly if for whatever reason because so often people say, oh, I'm not happy, or this feels horrible, but when you then say, well, if you look at X, Y, or Z resource, then have a look and see where what you're experiencing sits with that, and then they will read that fits in with abusive behaviours. That can be a really challenging thing to get your head around, particularly if this person is someone that you love, and they often will also have very, very good traits and qualities, because there's a model that's called the charmer harmer, where essentially they depict it as being two sides of the same coin. So charming on one side, harming on the other. So it can be very confusing to navigate if you experience different extremes of someone's personality and behaviours. So there's a lot there.
Have you had an abuser that's surprised? So I don't know, let's consider financial abuse, where someone doesn't really realize that their behavior's abusive. In the military, you often get a situation where it's the military, the serving member is the earner and the spouse isn't working. And if the serving member is just like, oh, you can have a bit of pocket money, or the spouse has to ask, and often their request is denied, and these kinds of things. And obviously, I'm sure there's more severe elements to financial abuse than that. But have you ever had a time where you've said to someone, you're abusing, what you're doing isn't okay, it's abusive, and they've just been really shocked and unaware of their own
Yeah,
behavior?
absolutely. And I think so often in that situation, it might be because they themselves have, and this is by no means stereotyping, it's not always the case, but I'd say often someone who exhibits abusive behavior has been subjected to it,
Right.
maybe growing up, let's say, or maybe in a previous partnership, but often growing up. And in their mind, because their behavior is nowhere near as bad as what they were maybe subjected to as a child, they feel that they've made a huge leap, which often they have. Often, in terms of what they are doing versus what they were on the receiving end of, there is a huge difference and a huge improvement. But then what they haven't quite been able to see, just because of what we call frame of reference, i.e. their perception of the world, is that still is not appropriate or acceptable, and it still counts as abuse, even though it's a vastly different picture to what they experienced. And something like financial abuse, as you were saying there, that example, yes, I mean, I can quite see why someone might not think that that's abusive, but that's maybe just what the done thing is, or that's what the profile of a breadwinner versus someone who is maybe more in the homely role, what that looks like. But that's where it's then talking about, again, what you both need, what your expectations are, and working out what your own script as a couple is. Because coming back, I could talk about this all day. So one of the ways we work as relationship therapists is we come from a viewpoint where everything is a system. So we work through systemic practice, and basically, put simply, that is the idea that we are all part of the system, and the two factors that influence us most in terms of who we are in our present day intimate relationship is our family of origin, whatever that looked like, and any past intimate relationship dynamics that we may have had. And if we just look at the family of origin, typically those are going to be people we're related to by blood. It's about learning and taking the time to understand when you are working with clients. I mean, it's not necessarily vital in all couple work situations, but I'd say frequently, sort of 7, 8 out of 10 couples, I would do this piece of work, really understanding where they are from, what their family of origin looked like, what their influencing factors growing up, what that looked like, and then we can look at scripts. So the idea is that there are 3 different kinds of scripts that we can carry on. So there is the replicative script, so that can both have positives and negative forms. So in the most negative form, that would be where the abused goes on to become the abuser. That would be a negative replicative script. But a positive replicative script would be, I know you saw your parents doing something well, what you perceive to be done well in their dynamic, and therefore you have then said, well, I'm going to replicate that with my future partner, or that's why I'm doing X, Y, Z, because I see that that's a healthy way to be. A corrective script is when you have witnessed something which can either be minor or major growing up or in a previous setting where you think, actually, that really is not something I want to reproduce. So I'm going to actively do something different to that. So you're proactively correcting that. And then the third would be there are different terms for it, but I always call it the integrative script, where you both take time to learn about each other's family of origins and your own belief systems, your own scripts, and then come up with an integrated version that works best for both of you, taking elements of all of that. So it's complicated but fascinating.
Yeah, gosh, I could sit here and listen all day about this stuff. It is really interesting. And I suppose what I'd like to know is, have you got like an inspirational example of, has there been a case? I know you can't give away details and things like that, but just in a very general sense, has there been something that stuck with you? I know I worked for children's services for years in early intervention,
Oh,
and
wow.
the so the some of the turnaround in families and outcomes for children, there are some cases that stick with you where you just feel like, wow, what a
Yeah,
difference that intervention has made for that child's life, and you just know that they're going to thrive now.
absolutely.
And so I just wonder if you have anything like that, if there's anything that's really stuck with you that perhaps if you shared, it might just give someone listening some hope, maybe.
Absolutely. I'd say probably I mean, I'm always so privileged to be alongside all of my clients. I can't express that enough. It is just such a joy. Absolutely love what I do. I'd say probably one of the biggest transformations you can see if you're talking about working within a partnership is, let's say they are a high conflict couple, or they've come to you because they argue a lot. High conflict, things escalate quickly, communication is poor, and then uh, with some direction, with some homework tips, using those and demonstrating those communication tools within the context of the session, and then making sure they're happy to use those in the home setting, and really watching then those tools become integrated into their daily practice, or regular practice at least, and then seeing that communication increase, the conflict, the arguments, the miscommunication decrease. I think that is so inspiring and encouraging, because in those situations, so often people come in feeling it can never be different. They can't imagine that it would ever be different. But actually it can be, if you have 2 willing parties. I think that is the key thing, who are prepared to sit and work together, and really follow that guidance. So I would say that that is a really, really encouraging thing from my perspective when I see that shift. Because, even at the beginning, early on, we're probably all thinking, "Oh, this is quite unlikely. It's gonna change." But people are capable of a lot, and I think that's what everyone needs to
Yeah.
remember.
Um, so I could be wrong here, so I don't know. You could correct me. I think in my mind, I think whatever path the counselling takes someone down in the sessions, so whether that's the example of the strategies and the interventions and the support really helps a couple to overcome some issues, or whether the counselling helps them to come to terms with the fact that this is the end for them, or whether it helps them with in some other way, or it might help an individual come to terms with being on their own or putting themselves back out there, whatever it is it that everyone leaves the whole program, if you like, in a better place, whatever that looks like? Or is that not always the case?
I mean, that would certainly be our hope, that even if, say, even if it's not the expected or even the hoped for outcome at the beginning, let's maybe talk about, as you were saying, where one party, which is a common and sad presentation, where I think one person has come often to the counselling with the agenda that they're going to be sort of letting their partner know that they don't want to continue with them, and they've sort of brought them along with the hope that you can hold and support that process. That is a particularly sad sort of presentation, because that if we take that instance, often that partner has already made that decision, maybe months, years ago, even in some situations, and the person over here is absolutely none the wiser. So that can be a really devastating blow. So I use that example because from their perspective, obviously the counselling won't have had the desired outcome, i.e. that they're still together and that the relationship has improved. They might not have even seen that the relationship had any problems, but the hope would be that because they have entered the counselling process, we would then be able to support them with what then has happened. So I would like to think that for the majority of the time, the counselling process will have been helpful to people, even if the outcome has not been quite what they have necessarily wanted or expected or hoped for, because particularly in not so much in individual work, because that should generally, providing it's a good client therapist match, and I don't mean that judgmentally at all, because sometimes you can have excellent practitioners but they just don't match quite with that client, because it has to be a personal rapport as well. You have to get on. But I think that tends to be easier in terms of getting to a desired end goal, because it's between you and that client. Whereas when there are essentially three of you in that dynamic, it's also very dependent on the agendas of, or the two parties in the couple. So I would like to think there's always benefit gained, even if the outcome is maybe not necessarily always what has been expected or desired or hoped for. I guess in some situations, like with anything, there might be some people who have found it not helpful, or maybe they've found it really traumatic. But I have to say, touch wood, I'm now calling it in, aren't I? I can't recall where there has been someone who's reported that back. That it has been unhelpful, that there has always been a reflection that some learning has come from it.
Amazing. And what are the common barriers then that prevent people from seeking relationship counselling?
Well, that's an interesting one. And I guess if we're talking about particularly military partnerships, if you're hoping to attend with your spouse, one of you or both of you are in the services, I guess actually being in the same location for long enough the time to actually attend appointments, because that's what it does require, particularly early on in the therapy, regular committed attendance. So if someone's coming and going and absent for a few weeks and you can't get those few sessions embedded and under your belt early on, that is going to be problematic. So I'd say that would be a barrier. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, finances, because it is not a cheap thing to engage with. Even though there are people out there who offer reasonably priced sessions, like I'd like to think I'm at the more reasonable end of the scale, but it's still not a cheap process. But then going to the dentist isn't cheap if you go privately, or other things, getting your hair done isn't cheap, or your nails. So it is about thinking what you want to invest your money in. But I can think of many people who would say, well, I'd rather, that seems like such a big commitment attending, and maybe it will just blow over and things will get better, or we don't need that intervention because we can get there ourselves. But coming back to the financial perspective and that sort of stuff. That's why with specifically the military community in mind, it is really good to have an idea of what resources are available free of charge, or certainly a certain number of funded sessions. So for example, in my day, we used to support all 3 services through a degree of funded sessions, but then I think they stopped with the army and someone else got that. But certainly I can still confirm that Relate do still offer funded sessions to Royal Navy and Royal Marines, and I think the RAF as well. I think they certainly did when I was there. But
Okay.
yeah, you'd have to double check that. But the Royal Navy, Royal Marines, definitely.
Okay. And how would they access it then? If someone's listening to this and feels like they want to take that step, how would they
Yes.
access that service?
So again, I haven't worked there for a couple of years. Things have changed a little bit because it's all become a national organisation now. But what I would recommend is ringing up the number, explaining that you are either the serving person or the spouse of the serving person, and then in my day it was as simple as just providing the service number, and then that would generate some paperwork, and then that would enable you to access your funded sessions. And going back to my day, that would relate to one, initial assessment, because that's what you always have at Relate. So you have that initial assessment to just ascertain that it is indeed appropriate to be entering into couple counselling if you're attending as a couple, and then 6 further funded ongoing sessions after that would be funded.
Okay.
So it is well worth doing. And I guess also come back to what you were saying, what might be preventing factors: stigma, concern that it's going to be a difficult process. I think the stigma around counselling has lifted a lot, which is fantastic.
I agree with you around this stigma. I think people talk, so I can edit the barking out as long as you can hear me.
Oh, I can absolutely hear you.
I think people there's such a big thing now about talking and being open,
Yes,
and
100%.
especially men talking about their emotions as well. So I agree there. I think although there is still work to be done, I think especially with men talking about their emotions, but definitely the stigma is coming down. I've got here around, are there increased trust issues?
I'd say in terms of sort of looking at the RN/RM population in general, and the ones who of those who I would then see in counselling versus civvy partnerships coming through the door, I'd probably say I mean, trust crops up all over the place. It is a very common presentation in relationship counselling across the board, but I would say it is a big theme in terms of military partnerships. I suppose it depends, because even if you're not sleeping in the same parts of the ship, unless it's like a stag ship, for example, if we're talking about a ship scenario, there are going to be a mix of genders on there typically. So I don't know whether the fact that you're sharing sleeping accommodation would make much of a difference to trust versus just knowing that there are different
Yeah.
the opposite sex on board, for example, because you can still bump in, you're still working alongside them, even though you're not living, like, I guess, in the same quarters as such. Is that, I'm not even using the right terminology, am
Yeah,
I?
because trust isn't, it's not about, again, you can correct me or um, elaborate on this, but in my mind, I think trust, so say if it was me and my husband, the
Mm.
trust is really about me. It's not really about him and his actions. Is that right? So it's about the person that doesn't have the trust, isn't it? It's not really about the other person. Is that right?
Well, I guess it's about having a belief in what the two of you have agreed,
Yeah.
in terms of what is and is not acceptable, and what is your own understood boundaries. And the trust, I guess, comes into play there, is your belief about whether that is going to be upheld in your absence.
Yeah.
So will those behaviours that you've agreed and will everything that you think that you understand as in being the correct sort of code of relationship conduct between the two of you, will that be upheld when you are not there? Will that be upheld during long periods of time apart? And will that be upheld particularly, say, if there is a person or persons who maybe come into the scene who maybe aren't respecting of that? Because that's the thing, you can never then manage or hope to manage the behavior of someone who's probably unknown to you altogether. And it's trusting that the person that you're with is going to handle that in the way that you feel is appropriate and respectful to your dynamic.
Yeah.
That's the trust, I guess.
Yes, I've seen people just go crazy over trust issues where the other partner has never done anything to hint that they're untrustworthy, but it's just something within that person, and it drives them mad, and it's ruined, you know, relationships because they just can't get over their trust issues. It's sad.
It
It's
is
sad,
really
really.
sad. It is really sad. And I guess it's in those situations, firstly, it's understanding what is causing those trust issues. So if it's about something historic, trying to work out and process that and work out whether parts of that belong to the present day or not. If there are behaviours, even if everything has been unproven and there's nothing categorical that indicates there's been a breach of trust, working out again, if both partners are happy to do so, what maybe could be introduced into the couple dynamic to help with any insecurities or trust issues. It is very difficult, and it can be very, very, very eroding if someone has trust issues and the other person perceives they're not doing anything wrong. And often even the person with the trust issue says, they're not doing anything wrong, but I still can't shift sort of my fears or concerns or my jealousy or whatever it is. So in those situations, I would really recommend trying to understand, with the help of a therapist, is going to probably be the most likely helpful route to do this, to establish what is the cause of those issues, and then what maybe could be done, presuming that there is nothing relational going on where that trust is being jeopardized, what could be done to help make that more manageable. And I think it's about, I'd say this applies to friendships as well, but it's about behaving and acting with regards to whoever it is, your spouse, your partner, your friend, as if they were in your room. Loyalty is not when you stick up for someone or defend someone or show loyalty to a partnership with someone when they're in the room. It's what you do when they're not in the room. It's what you do and how you conduct yourself when they're not present. That's what true loyalty and dedication is, and that's what trust is built off. And 99% of the time, that's the thing, we won't even know about those examples when a situation has been shut down or a comment has been made and someone's responded in a correct way to defend their partnership or to not let that escalate. We all know those one-liners that are just used as like a little testing ground to see if the water is open. Water is open, is that the saying? Well, it's just to test the ground, isn't it? Just those one-liners.
Yeah.
And I think it can be how someone responds to that in that moment can then dictate what unfolds. And that is, I think, where, particularly in the service setting, we have to be trusting of that, because when they are on the other side of the world or are on a ship with people that we have no idea who they are, 9 times out of 10, it's trusting that they are going to handle things in advance of anything escalating. Because generally speaking, I would say, particularly in that setting as well, that military setting where you're working alongside each other, something isn't just going to suddenly happen out of the blue. It's going to be something that is gradually escalating. So it might be an initial flirty comment or something that isn't shut down. So it's just, I guess, without sounding too formal, but being aware of that and policing it. And it can happen in any workplace, can't it? But just really not risking entertaining anything. So any mixed messages cannot be possible. So no mixed messages are given, and nothing can possibly be misconstrued that could lead to a harder situation to manage down the line.
That's it. And it is that instant shutting down. I think one of the modern day challenges with this is social media. And again, I
Oh
see it on
yes.
these
Oh
groups all the time where someone is saying, I've seen some messages, or my
yeah.
husband's been messaging someone, or my wife's
Yeah.
done this, or something. Like social media is so dangerous for that because
Mm,
it's very easy to slip down that slope, isn't it? It's a slippery thing if you just respond to a message with
yeah.
a flirty quip or something,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
that's it, then it's started.
It has. It has. And the thing is, again, if these are them people that you're working with, and if it's them people you're spending protracted periods of time away with as well, even something there where there was no particular intention, it can then just build its own momentum. And so often, I sit with people and they say, I don't really even know how that's happened. I mean, even people in more sort of classic jobs where it is like an office setting, but still, some communication has maybe happened which is external to that setting, and then it's just grown its own momentum without any real thought or intention to it. But then suddenly you can find yourself in all kinds of hot water, which is where a lot of hurt can be caused, and often it's really unnecessary because there is no real intention there. But just, yeah, it's really important to be very mindful.
That's it. And I like that. It's the shutting down, that it's just an instant shutdown. Maybe that should be a common thing in relationships that they talk
Yeah,
about, or
yeah,
maybe if people were just honest and said, oh, an ex from 10 years ago come propped up in my inbox, messaged me to say
yes,
hi, but I shut them down, you know,
exactly,
and then you
exactly.
can talk about it then, and it's open and everyone's aware. I wonder,
Yeah,
maybe that should just be something that's more openly discussed. And I guess if shutting down doesn't have to be a I'm not interested, it's just a block.
no,
It's just that I don't need to talk to you, you're from my
exactly,
past, and block them.
exactly, 100%. I mean, I read something. I can't remember if it was a real life story, if it was a case study or an example used to talk about that sort of stuff. It was on one of the many like psychology counselling things I'm subscribed to, and it was just this man saying he was in bed on his phone. His wife was asleep beside him. On his phone popped up a friend request from a attractive sort of a past co-worker, so we didn't work with her anymore, but it was a ex co-worker who popped up, very attractive. It was just a friend request, nothing else. He was looking at it, mulling what to do, turned to look at his wife who was sleeping there, not looking nearly as attractive as this very
Oh,
like perfectly preened person in this picture. Um, but there she was lying there, trusting him, comfortable in their home. She'd built a family for him, and he just declined the bloody friend request. And there we go. And no damage was done.
good. Apart from
And
the bloody husband thinking his wife doesn't look as attractive as this, filtered picture, but we can move past that one because I'm sure we'd all thought things like that really,
and
but
I
you'd never admit it, would you?
and I think I think that's why they threw that in there, was the idea that okay, in that picture that was just a very selected snapshot, i.e. it was a profile picture, that's not going to be the real picture, that
It's
is
not the
just
reality.
exactly. And that was his awareness, that he was thinking how lucky he was that she felt comfortable to be there
Yeah,
with him, makeup free, hair estate, because that's what true beauty and connection is, being on that level with someone rather than this picture that has probably been edited and filtered to the hills, and you probably walk past her in real life because she doesn't even resemble it, I'd imagine.
you gave me goosebumps there because that is the true beauty and connection, isn't it?
Exactly.
And it's actually really hard to find that connection. So for military spouses that are concerned when their husband's deployed or their wife's deployed or whoever it is that they're in a relationship is away, to just actually hold on to the fact that it's really hard. It's like one in a
Yes.
million to find that person that you
It
connect with,
is.
so you have to push these thoughts out of your head, don't
Mm,
you? Because that connection is rare and it's special once you have it. And I think that our partners in the military, they know that and they appreciate that, and they come back to the ones they love, don't they? So having been honest,
I
that
really agree. And I think linking just to what we were saying there, whether military or not, I mean, as you were saying, maybe some more like emphasis on that shutting down and stopping something potentially growing, or someone getting the wrong idea before it's even started. Coming back to what I said about having that conversation really early on in any dynamic about what is and is not acceptable, introduce along amongst that, what role does social media play? Does liking someone's photo, does that count? Okay, you might not call it cheating, but does that count as inappropriate behavior? Does DMing someone, PMing someone, all the modern day lingo, does that count as something that's unacceptable? Where is that line? And making sure that you are crystal clear. Don't let that's what I always say to people, if at all possible, don't let a reason why you end up in a relationship crisis be through a miscommunication, if at all possible. Don't be one of you saying, I didn't think that was a problem, and the other one saying, well, for me that's a huge deal breaker. If you have to get to that point, be at that point because someone has done that knowingly, I suppose. And that's probably a weird thing to say, but then it makes it a much easier process to sort of work with, because the options are plainer to see. It's not because there has been any grey area that has been strayed into unknowingly. If it is because a deliberate action has been made, then you're already able to work in a different territory, i.e., okay, well, why did this happen? What were the reasons behind it? And then,
Yeah.
is there a way to move forward? Do you both indeed want to move forward?
Yeah. Right. Well, I could go on and on for hours, but I'm actually late for the school run.
Oh,
So
bless you.
I
Oh,
booked Theo into after school club, but it's only for the first hour, so I'm gonna have to dash. But
of
I
course.
I don't want to just end on a just end. I just want to check if there's anything else that we haven't covered that you think is important that we should go over.
I think we've done very well. Like, thank you so much. I think yes, we've talked about all sorts. I guess I won't go into it too much because I don't want to take up your time, but depending on how you edit it and look at the domestic violence thing, I guess just one thing I would be very keen to point out is that domestic violence is obviously two ways. I know predominantly,
Yeah,
certainly in my work, I predominantly do see it where the male is the perpetrator, but we do always have to have an awareness that men can be on the receiving end of that too.
I think
And often,
in your example, you actually used a female perpetrator.
yes, well, that's very good then. That's very good. Just just to emphasize that, because so often society doesn't take that so seriously, and so often that's a lot harder for it makes it a lot harder for men to speak out and talk about that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, do you know, if I ever feel the need for relationship counselling, I would absolutely want to come to you. I just think you
Oh,
are bloody amazing, and your passion for your work just oozes from you. I can tell that you love helping people and
oh,
moving them to a more positive stage of their relationship, no matter what that looks like, whether it's a relationship with themselves, their partner, or, whatever they've got going on. So I just think you're
oh.
amazing. And I like to think that all relationship counselors are just as amazing as you because,
Oh,
yeah,
now you're making me blush. You
yeah,
asked if there's anything that
there you
really making me
go.
blush.
Honestly, I'm just so blown away by the chat that we've just had. And I really appreciate everything that you do. And I'm sure you've helped so many people with your work. And I think that this podcast and this information is going to help a lot more people. Fingers crossed.
Oh, thank you so, so much. Well, firstly, those are incredibly kind words. I'm not sure I am at all worthy of all that very, very kind praise, but thank
You
you.
definitely are.
And thank you so much for chatting to me and coming on your amazing podcast. It's such a brilliant idea, and I know it will be helping lots of people moving forward. So I wish you every success with it, and I will be your number one fan watching.
Thank you so thank
Such
you
a
so
joy.
much.
I hope our paths cross in the real world at some point.
I'm sure they will. The Navy community is small, so definitely.
It
All
will be
right.
lovely. Thank you so much for your time.
And get back to your lovely little girl.
I will. Thank you so much. Go and pick up your son.
I will. I'm going to dash. All
Yeah.
right. Take care.
I take care. Bye.
Bye.